My husband has a spirit attached to him. We call it the Mimic. One time, when he was living with roommates before he met me, his roommates went on their honeymoon for 2 weeks, and he stayed home. He was just playing Call of Duty and lazing around when he heard his female roommate yell for him, "Hey D, come look at this YouTube video I found." Then he heard her laughing. Without thinking, he went into their room, and of course, he found nobody there. In other instances, he has heard my voice speaking. I heard my mom talking. We've both heard our former roommate cursing his computer when he was at work. My husband's mom has heard me saying something when I wasn't home. And it follows him from house to house. It's so creepy. So the latest instance was just recently. My husband and my mother-in-law and I all heard the same thing, but found nothing. It sounded like one of our cats meowing in the guest bathroom. But we're moving right now, so we have our cats confined to my husband and I's room. We knew immediately after talking about it that the Mimic had followed us to the new house. It's not too scary, and it doesn't necessarily do anything, but it sounds like people we know. And I've also blamed it for being the reason that fresh produce spoils so quickly in our house, but I can't prove that. I don't really know why it's here or what it wants, but it's definitely creepy. My cousin and I were young at the time. It's 2006 and we're both toddlers. We were playing PlayStation 1 on the living room floor with our backs to the kitchen and front door. No one is home besides my cousin, myself, and my dad, who is sleeping in the other room on a couch. Out of absolutely nowhere, we hear my aunt's voice, clear as day, being projected from directly behind us say, "Hey boys, what are you doing?" So my cousin and I turn around, expecting my mother, aunt, and other cousin to be there having returned from the mall. But there was absolutely no one there, and nothing to be heard but faint snoring from the other room. My aunt did not return to the house for several more hours. Another time, my cousin and I were at my grandmother's house for Christmas. We were sitting in a spare bedroom watching TV, while the adults were in the other room talking at the table. We have a clear view of sight down the hallway into my grandparents' bedroom. We hear our names being called from that direction. When we go to look, we see a shadow figure as tall as the door frame walk past my grandparents' bedroom doorway. My cousin and I investigated the room immediately, but nobody was in there. Those are just a couple of weird experiences that we've had together, but this Mimic, or Mimics, have been following us for a while now. This isn't the first paranormal encounter I've had, but it is only the second time someone was with me when something strange and inexplicable happened. We moved to the new house we're currently living in October of last year. I should mention, the house we came from also had its share of very creepy happenings, and there's one event that I feel might be connected to what happened in the new house. I was home alone with my dog, reading on my bed. My parents at the time were remodeling their bathroom, and had met with the man who would be doing the job at the home improvement store down the block to look at tiles. Now this whole encounter is quick, and it happened in a matter of seconds, but even now, years later, I struggle to think about it without it upsetting me. Before I get on with it, I just want to say that I was in near silence. No music was playing, no TV. My laptop was off and charging. I wasn't on my phone, no headphones. Basically, I wasn't doing anything that would have caused a noise. And seeing as I was home alone, the only source of a human voice would have been me. The only sound that could be heard was the sound of the air conditioner. So I was on my bed reading. My dog was downstairs, presumably napping since he was like 12 years old at the time. He's still kicking it, and he's 17 now, by the way. He has a heart condition that causes him to get tired easily. All of a sudden, I hear my mom's voice greeting the dog like she always does when she comes home. And I mean exactly the way she does, switching between English and Spanish, the same tone, everything. I stood up and stretched, but then I realized I hadn't heard the door open. So I approached the stairs and very confusedly called out to my mom. "Mom?" Silence. And then my dog starts screaming. I mean screaming as if he was being tortured, crying and whining all over the place. I started calling out to him, scared out of my mind. I took the first step of the stairs down and immediately froze. Something felt so very wrong, and I was flushed with this primal fear. I knew without a doubt that whatever had greeted my dog was not my mom. Whatever it was, it literally froze me with fear. My dog finally came running up, zoomed right past me into my room, headed into the bathroom and hid behind the toilet. Mind you, through tears and shaky hands, I did call my mom. I practically blew her phone up, but all I got was voicemail. That was the first time something like that had happened to me, and I knew I couldn't just explain it away and shelve it in the back of my mind. Later, when my mom got home, I told both of my parents what happened. They brushed it off, said I was just imagining things. The second time happened in November of last year, but in between moving in and settling in, finding a new job, my grandmother's health declining, and how scared my mom was, now has been the only time that I've been calm enough to tell the story. This is the story of what I refer to as the Mimic. This new house we moved to was built literally a month before we moved in. The neighborhood is still under construction. My mom and I were sitting in the family room, giving each other pedicures. My stepfather had gone out with his grandfather to run some errands. We were watching something on Netflix, and we both heard my stepdad come in through the front door. My mom called out to him, "Are you okay?" To which we both heard him respond, "Yeah, honey, I'm good." We heard him open the garage and go in, and obviously we thought nothing of it. 20 minutes pass, and we both nearly jump out of our skins when my grandfather opens the backyard door in the family room, peeks his head in, and asks us to open the garage when we had a chance so that they could unload the groceries. My mom and I look at each other, again confused, as it seems to be an ongoing theme here, and she says, "Isn't it open? John just came in." We both look at each other, and she starts calling out to him, but my grandfather cuts her off and tells her that that's impossible because my stepdad, John, was out back. We go out to look, and there, getting out of his car, was my stepdad. So as not to confuse anyone, we have a huge, and I mean huge, backyard, fenced in. My parents are in the midst of fixing up the backyard of this new house, so my grandfather had gone to the home improvement store to pick up some supplies and cement blocks to stand the barbecue on. That's why they brought the car to the back. I look at my mom to see that she has the same petrified look on her face that I did. My stepdad is still getting out of the car, not looking at us, and he goes, "Sorry guys, I left the house key by accident. Can you open the garage door so we can unload the groceries?" There's a second fridge in the garage. There's 6 people in one house. My mom takes off inside with me trailing behind her, and lo and behold, the lock on the front door was still on, and the garage door was still locked. I can't even explain how terrifying that was for my mom and I. We don't speak of it. That day my parents fought for hours. My mom thought it was my stepdad playing some kind of prank on her, but that was clearly not the case. Later that night, when my mom was alone, I approached her. I reminded her of what happened before, and I asked her what she thought about it. My mom looked at me very sharply, dead in the eye, and says, "Don't you ever talk about this again. Don't." I didn't think to connect the two experiences until now. I knew I had had a similar experience, but I never thought that it would follow us, but maybe it did? Since then, I haven't encountered the mimic, and that's just fine by me. This story isn't mine, but I always thought that it was really interesting, and I recently got permission to tell it. It's strange, but entirely true. Whether you believe it or not, I hope you at least find it interesting too. In the 2000s, my mom, out of nowhere, experienced some unusual occurrences, which I suppose could be described as visions. It only happened a handful of times, and with a pretty large time gap in between them. Each vision was only a few seconds long, during which a vivid and lifelike image or moving scene would gradually materialize in front of her. It lasted long enough for her to see it, and then it dissipated. In the first, in 2000, she was in a cafe at Christmas time and was admiring a fellow customer's long blonde hair, when suddenly she saw her in a casket with her hair tied in a braid. It was so jarring that she left shortly afterward, disturbed by what she had seen and unable to find a cause for it. In the second experience in 2005, she was in a meeting with her attorney, and a scene began playing in the after dusk, showing a woman in a garden of flowers, dressed in soft, light-colored clothing and glowing with pure happiness, as if she had an aura around her. My mom felt that although it was awkward, she couldn't leave without knowing, and decided to tell her what she had seen. The attorney, who had throughout the meeting been very professional but unmoved by anything, was so stunned that she got tears in her eyes and confirmed that it was true. She loved flowers and was happiest when gardening. The third and final time this happened was in 2008, which is my favorite story and the one that I find most interesting. We moved to a new house that year, an odd place in that the house itself was tiny, but there was a disproportionately large backyard and a lawn running about 50 feet wide and 140 feet long. At the very end, there was a small embankment or grassy knoll directly behind which sat a canal of water, like the kind that people sail barges down for fun. It was the first time that we had ever lived so close to a body of water, and we would watch people sail their boats there on weekends, feed bread to the passing ducks. All was well. But then there came another vision, this time about the water. She was sitting on her bed one morning, just thinking about her day, when a scene began materializing before her. Only unlike the other two, she was a part of this one and not just a spectator. In it, she was a young child who found herself running down to the bottom of our yard one night in order to see the boat that was sailing by. She ran all the way down, just in time to catch the boat as it came past. A 1920s-style riverboat, all lit up, similar to the kind that were popular in the southern states. She said that she felt strongly like it was a regular occurrence, running down to catch the boat as it passed, like something she did every week. The boat did not sail on the water of the canal, which of course would have been too shallow, but almost appeared to float as if there was a deeper body of water sitting above the real one. She could see the faces of the people on the boat with perfect clarity, watching them as they waved to her like they knew her. There were women in dresses with parasols, and the sound of saloon-style pianos, honky-tonk or something similar. It was like a party was in full swing, she said, everybody having a ball. When the boat had almost fully passed, and the vision began to dissolve, my mom's overriding thought afterward was, how could a riverboat fit on a barge canal? She found the whole experience thoroughly eerie, much more than the other two visions, and can still remember the faces and music even now, more than a decade on from the event. She has no connection to the states in which riverboats were popular during that time, being European-born and raised, nor any interest in that particular time boat nor riverboats, though she's thoroughly creeped out by them to this day. We were playing a game recently in which a riverboat appeared, and it unsettled her so much that she quit playing. I know it might all mean nothing, and could just be a random glitch of the imagination or a trick of the mind or something. But I find the details very compelling, especially the part about being a child. I hope somebody has some input on it, but either way, I hope you enjoyed the story. This happened to me almost a year ago, and I still can't explain it. My mom and I and my siblings went on a cruise in October of 2019. After a trip to Calgary, I went back to our cabin, while the other three already went to the restaurant. I just wanted to bring our bags to the cabin and then go to the restaurants too. So I entered our cabin and everything started to feel blurred. I can't find a better word for it. I started to feel very confused, and I wasn't even sure I was in the right cabin anymore, even though I opened the door by myself with our key. I checked the room and decided, yeah, that's our room, but this weird, confused feeling stayed. Then I noticed my mom's old golden phone with the broken screen and a picture of my siblings as a background on the table. I asked myself, why did they bring her old phone to this cruise? And flight mode wasn't turned on, and that made me pretty angry. So I took the phone, turned on flight mode, and left the room to find my family in the restaurant. When I arrived there, I asked them about the phone, but nobody knew that they took it with us on the cruise. I didn't believe them, but I also started to doubt what I saw since I was already feeling so weird. We went back to our cabin, and the phone was gone. I had touched this phone, picked it up, turned on flight mode, and set it right back down. I started to feel very uncomfortable about what happened, but still, nobody believed me. After a while of discussing, my family decided to ask housekeeping about the phone. And yes, there was a phone. As a reminder, I saw a golden phone with a broken screen with a photo of my siblings on it, and the phone language was German. But the phone that had really been there was black, with a template as a background, and the phone language was Hindi. It was the phone of the housekeeper. He had forgotten it in our room and took it back when I left the cabin. But why did I see what I saw? Why did I have this extreme blurry feeling as soon as I entered that room? Why would I have seen my mom's old phone instead of that one, and our pictures, in German? I have no answer to this. I wasn't drinking, it wasn't hot. I have no idea how to explain this. So it's 1982, and Ronald Reagan is turning the US Navy from 400 ships into 600 ships because of the Soviet Union. So the Navy takes a lot of old ships that they mothballed in Bremerton, Washington, and tow them over to Tacoma to refurbish them and bring them back into service. I'm sure they did this everywhere they had old Navy ships. So I get a job as a security guard with a company being contracted with Tacoma Boat, who have a huge contract with the US Navy. I can't remember the name of the ship, but it was an electronic warfare ship, which means I have no idea what it was for. Probably a spy ship that listened in on Soviet ships and submarines, but I'm just guessing. I wasn't from the Navy. I was a civilian security guard with 8 hours of security training under my belt, assigned to walk the entire ship every couple of hours. Me and another guy, and the other guy was crazier than a squirrel on meth, but hey, when you're paying your guards $3.15 per hour, you take what you can get. We took turns walking the ship, as we called it, had to go all over to make sure that nobody was there. The workers got there at 6 a.m. and left by 7 p.m. Lots of expensive tools lying around, as well as paintbrushes, paint guns, sanders, all kinds of things that one could sell if you ripped them off. So that's what we were for. Nobody was supposed to be on the ship at all, except for me and the hyperactive mental fellow security guard. We took turns. I would walk the ship 1 hour, and he would walk it the next. Then me the next, and so on and so forth until our shift was over at 6 a.m. The ship appeared to be pretty much gutted of just about all of its electronic equipment. I was told that all of the old equipment was being replaced with new, but they had to paint it all inside and out first, and they were still in the painting phase. Also, they were working on the engines below, hence all the tools that I saw in the engine room. I worked there maybe 5 days at most, not even that. It was a long time ago. I would hear voices. I'd be in one room and voices would come from the corridor. I'd be in the corridor and voices would come from a room. Just the voices of men, like they were talking to each other. I'd go into the corridor when I heard the voices and I'd see nobody and hear nothing. Then the voices would come from a certain room. I'd rush in there and, again, nobody there. Silence. I concluded that there were radios on the ship and some kind of PA system that I wasn't familiar with. I told the other guard about the voices. He said, "Man, that's wild. I mean, I don't know." He was either crazy or high, and I couldn't tell which. I asked him if he was playing a joke on me, and he laughed and denied it. I still wasn't sure because he looked pretty crazy. This was long before drug testing. The last night I was there, same thing, the voices all over the place. One of the mechanics who worked on the engine came in early at about 5 p.m. and was sipping coffee in our guard room, which was part of a trailer. I said, "I'm hearing those voices again all over the ship. Must be some kind of radio." The mechanic swallowed his coffee hard and shook his head. "Nope, no radios on this ship. Took them all out. They're gonna install new ones, but they're not here yet." I was stunned. I said, "Are you sure?" He took another sip of coffee and nodded yes. I didn't go back. Today, I kind of regret not going back and trying to communicate with the entities on that ship. Back in 2017, we went on a Caribbean cruise, and our ship was called the Harmony of the Seas. My whole family slept in the same cabin. My little sister and I shared a bunk bed which could be separated from the rest of the room by a curtain. It was our first night, and I woke up at 4:27 a.m. I thought my sister was looking at me from the corner of the curtain, so at first I was like, "What are you doing?" But it didn't take long before I realized that it was not my sister. I had no clue who or what was watching me. So I turned on my light as fast as I could, but it was gone. I considered staying up until somebody would wake up, but I was so jet-lagged that I just fell back asleep again. The next night, the exact same thing happened. Someone with long, dark hair was staring at me. I was like, "Oh no, not this again." And just like the night before, I turned my light on as fast as I could, and it disappeared. I checked the time on my phone, and again it was 4:27. Needless to say, I kept my little light on for the rest of the cruise, and thankfully I didn't see her again. I suppose you could say I was having sleep paralysis, but I don't know how I would have been able to move that fast if that was the case. I don't know if anybody else has had an experience like this on the same ship or in that region, or maybe there's some kind of tragedy there on that ship that would have resulted in a ghost. But if you know anything, let me know. I had bought a small charcoal grill, the kind you can get at Walmart for like $20. I've been using it every night as a fire pit for the past few weeks. Tonight was no different. About 7 p.m., the sun is going down. so I decided I would put some charcoal in my fire pit and relax outside with the natural ambiance. It was going great until around 8 p.m. As the fire was just really getting going, I heard the loudest screech. It was like the yell of a human mixed with an animal, and both of them were being murdered. Now, before you say anything, I know, my first thought was it's a mountain lion, even though I was in an area surrounded by fields, no trees for miles. Not wanting a little mountain lion to ruin my evening, I decided to stay outside. While watching the fire, I put on some YouTube, how-to medieval blacksmith videos, as you do. I pretty much forgot the incident and just enjoyed the videos. Then, suddenly, after about an hour, the hair stands up on the back of my neck, and goosebumps cover my body. This feeling was one of the most panic-inducing feelings I've ever felt in my entire life. I would also like to mention that I'm a person who, admittedly stupidly, has walked in the woods at night and into sketchy street areas in the city. I've also had my fair share of the fabled dark web. I've seen plenty of really morbid things. I've done a lot of really stupid things. And I don't get scared. And I don't get scared. Ever. So this feeling was really out of character for me. I felt something was really wrong. So I decided to put out the fire and carry my chair back home. As I'm walking back to my house, I see a shadow man. He was standing by my mother's car. This thing was way too big to be a human. I mean, the shape was similar to that of a human, but it was jet black, way too tall, and it had ears that popped out. I stared at it for about 3 to 5 seconds, because I thought my eyes were playing a trick on me. This thing was so tall, waist length was the top of my mother's Toyota RAV4. However, after a few seconds, I knew that this was not something I wanted to fight with, if I even could. I ran back to my house, unlocked the door, opened a window, and tried to take a photo of it, but by that point it had disappeared. I'm trying to rationalize what this was, so if anybody knows what it could have been and you have a natural explanation, great. But if you don't, what do you think I should do? What do you think that thing was? Am I safe? Am I going crazy? I have no idea. I'm not sure what happened to me, but I'm going to describe it as best I can. First off, I live in the southern United States, and I'm a male in my 20s. I have experienced many things in my life, many strange and unusual things, and even though I believe in the paranormal and the supernatural, I always use logic first. But this, I genuinely can't explain. It's not incredibly scary, just strange. About 3 years ago, I woke up suddenly from sleep. This is not unusual for me, as I have insomnia, and usually I don't sleep. If I do, it isn't for long. My bed is pressed sideways on 2 big windows in the bedroom, so close that I can actually raise the blinds from my bed while lying down. At the time, my blinds on the window closet to the top of the bed broke, so I just put a big thin blanket over it to block out the light, even though it didn't do that great of a job, but it was well enough. My girlfriend was with me that night, and she was fast asleep when I jolted awake. I stared at the ceiling for a bit, before I turned my head toward the window. The moon was shining brightly, with some light coming through the blanket. I could see the shadow of the tree and bushes outside of my window, but I could also see another shadow. It was the outline of what looked like a person. Well, I was half asleep and actually laughed, thinking that it was just the way the trees and bushes came together, matrixing, like it was kind of an illusion. I leaned up and tapped on the window as a joke, and this thing's head moved a bit, and it took off faster than any human could move. I mean, within seconds, it just disappeared. I jumped out of bed, waking up my girlfriend next to me. I told her that somebody was outside the window, so I got a combat knife, I keep it next to my bed, and my flashlight. I ran outside and I didn't see anything. It was quiet. I went back in and I couldn't fall asleep knowing whatever was outside the window could have been staring at me for God knows how long. Here's the reason why I tell this. Here's the reason why I think it's paranormal. I went out the next day to look again. Now, it was autumn at this time with leaves and branches everywhere. So if it was someone standing outside of my window, well, there would have been footprints, along with broken branches from the bushes near my window. This thing was standing close to the window, but nothing was touched. Also, no human could run as fast as that thing did. And now that I think about it, I didn't hear any crunching sounds when it took off either. What the hell happened that night? This happened when I was in high school. My mom told me that both my sister and I were dead asleep, and it was the middle of the night. She was in bed and sort of fell into a half-sleep. Suddenly, she heard some footsteps downstairs, like someone was wearing slippers and walking around. We had hardwood floors throughout the whole house. Suddenly, the footsteps broke out into a fast shuffle, from the bathroom, through the living room, and into the kitchen. Then back to the bathroom. It went back and forth several times, so fast that it would have been impossible for a human to walk that fast with slippers on. The sound suddenly stopped, and there were a few seconds of silence. My mom then told me that the shuffling started up and down the steps in an inhuman speed, and to her bedroom door and back down again several times, before she finally heard whatever it was stop right next to her bed. She opened her eyes and she saw a woman with white skin look down at her, with long black hair draping over her face. My mom forced herself to grab the rosary under her pillow, and as she did, the woman disappeared from her bedside and she prayed. The next night, this happened again to her. She shared that whatever it was did the exact same thing and went right to her bedside after shuffling around the house in the same pattern. She didn't open her eyes this time, but held on to her rosary. She said that suddenly she heard my grandpa's voice, so her father, nonchalantly say, "Why didn't you come visit me?" My maternal grandparents during that time had recently moved to the East Coast to live with my uncle and aunt. They were very happy about the move. We had been unable to visit them as much as we would like. We live in California. The next day, my mom received a call that my grandpa had passed. During this time, my mom had been handling most of the family affairs on her own, as my dad was traveling a lot for his job. She'd been feeling pretty lonely, with my dad being gone, and feeling a bit lost after her parents moved to the East Coast. She was also raising 2 kids by herself, so she was stressed out. After I grew up a bit and had more understanding of the situation, it seems like my mom was experiencing sleep paralysis, but it still doesn't explain the scary episodes, and it doesn't make sense that my grandpa would choose this particular way to tell my mom that he had to go, and he would never accuse her of not visiting. They had a great relationship. My mom has had paranormal experiences before, when she was little growing up in Taiwan. She said that she vividly remembers crossing the train tracks, as she usually did for school, when she was around 6 years old. She made sure to look both ways for oncoming trains and crossed when it was cleared. She was baffled when other kids yelled at her urgently to cross the tracks. She couldn't understand why, but she sped up anyway. Right as she stepped off the tracks, a train zoomed past her, honking at her. If she hadn't listened to the kids, who knows what might have happened. My family has lived in this house for about 20 years now. When my mom bought it, it was around 1998. It was pretty old and it needed heavy renovation. It also came with a huge santol tree. It's common in Southeast Asia, where our garage is now. Fast forward to around 2013. My mom got the house renovated and the santol tree had to be cut down since we needed to have a garage made over it. This is when all of the sightings began. One night the power went out, and we all decided to sleep in the family room. So my mom pulled out blankets and mattresses and laid them out on the floor, because it was too hot to sleep inside of our rooms. We all went to bed at around 10 p.m. After a couple of hours, I woke up because I wanted to pee, and I looked around to find out that the power was still out. It was 2:45 in the morning, and I was laying down on the floor. I turned my head upward, because that's where the bathroom door is, and I immediately saw a figure of someone enter my room, coming from the bathroom. The two doors are side to side, forming a letter L. So I decided to wait and see who was up at that hour, because I honest to God thought it was my little brother. But why would he go straight into my unlit room instead of coming back to the mattress? 5 minutes passed, and no one came out of my room. 10 minutes, I was already beginning to think, what's taking him so long in the dark, when the family room was the only one lit with emergency lights and candles? I couldn't help it. I got up and looked around, only to find out that everyone was in bed asleep. I did a head count. All my siblings were there, and my parents too. The hairs on the back of my neck stood straight up, and I was terrified to turn around. The image was vivid. It was a man, and it went to my room. I didn't want to wake and scare everyone else, so I just held it, never went to the bathroom that night, and never spoke about it. In that same room years after is where I experienced my first episode of sleep paralysis. I laid down, and my bed was facing the window. It had curtains on, so I couldn't really see if it was open or closed. I fell asleep at around 11 p.m., and the room was dim. The only light was coming from the veranda slipping through my side window. Then the episode began. It was extremely vivid. I was still laying down in the same position that I fell asleep in last time, only facing a flat up this time. It was bad enough that I couldn't move, but to think that you see and hear this presence reaching out to you and you can't do anything about it, that was freaky. His long hands crept through my side, and all I could see were glimpses from my peripheral vision. I was so scared. I broke off from the episode, and the first thing that I saw when I woke up was the small gap between my curtain and my window. It was big enough for someone to actually see me from the outside. I was terrified. Chills went up and down my spine. I felt so uncomfortable and uneasy, as if somebody had been staring at me, out in the pitch black, all this time. They say that when you wake up in the middle of the night for no reason, it's actually because somebody is staring at you, and your brain senses the discomfort. I am a 22-year-old female, and I've had sleep paralysis since I was about 6. It would really freak me out when I was younger, and it caused a plethora of other issues in my life, such as insomnia. Anyway, I'm visiting my grandparents in New England, which is where our ancestors originally settled from Russia. The house is really old, and has been lived in for 3 to 4 generations. I don't get as freaked out as I used to staying here, but I was on high alert when I first arrived. I eventually relaxed and settled in, And then I experienced a really strange episode of sleep paralysis. Basically, when I entered the episode, I was lying straight on my back. There was a figure at the end of my bed. In a dreamlike state, I was able to move, even though I was still paralyzed. Maybe it was astral projection or a combination of lucid dreaming and sleep paralysis. I'm unsure. I grabbed my phone and thought to myself, hey, cameras can't hallucinate, so I'll just look through the camera on my phone to shake myself out of this. To my horror, I could still see the figure through the lens, although it was now sharpened because I have poor vision. It was my exact doppelganger. My features were the same and everything. I dropped my phone, terrified, calmed myself, grabbed my pillow and pushed it up against the doppelganger, only to find her rock solid. I started freaking out and fumbled to turn my light on, and when it was on, she was gone. What occurs next is what I believe to actually be a projection of some sort. I began walking through the house, where I saw members of my family who weren't actually in the state at the time, having a meal in the kitchen. I saw my grandma, who was actually in the house at the time, sleeping just rooms away. She greeted me and said, "Oh, you can't sleep either? We better get you back to bed." And boom, just like that, I woke up in my own bed, sweating. I got up and turned the light on for real this time, put on some Netflix, and tried to push the incident from my mind. Anyway, the next morning I got up for breakfast, and the first thing my grandmother said to me was, "Gosh, I just could not sleep last night." I was immediately put back on high alert. Later that day, I was perusing some old family albums and discovered a picture of my great-great-grandmother. Literally, she's the spitting image of me. We could have passed as identical twins. It could have been me dressed in a late 1800s Russian costume, or maybe my ancestor visited me in sleep paralysis. I showed it to my grandmother, whose jaw dropped, and I sent it to friends who all agreed that they could have thought that it was me. I truly believe it was the woman who was standing at the edge of my bed, and the people in the kitchen were other members of my family from generations back. Freaky. My girlfriend and I are both 20 and we live in Canada. I'm a longtime skeptic, but I've always been fascinated by the paranormal. Since I was a kid, I've had people tell me about their paranormal experiences that have no reason to lie to me. My girlfriend is one of them. So, hearing this experience left me with a chill. She went to bed the other night, nothing different from any other night. There was a massive storm outside, and she wasn't necessarily scared, but she was uncomfortable. During her sleep, she woke up, but couldn't move or talk. She just looked around the room from her current position. She said she was trying her best not to panic, and she couldn't see anything. Yet, she felt something brush her on her left. She sleeps on the right. Also worth noting, I wasn't there that night. Then in the corner of the room, she sees what seems to be a stunted figure standing by her dresser. She can't see the details or its face, but she knew that whatever it was, she'd never seen anything like it before. She described the sensation of what felt like someone finger-walking up her arm and chest before their hand closed around her throat. At this point, the stunted figure began walking forward slowly, and she was internally freaking out. She could now see that it had no face, just a void where the face should have been. The figure stopped in front of her face, almost like it was gazing into her eyes. She just stared back at the blank mass, and just like that it ended. She woke up some hours later in the morning, left shaken. She had trouble sleeping tonight because of the anxiety that it would happen again. I'm not really sure what to do to help her. The first two stories I'm going to tell you take place in one of the less fortunate parts of Thailand. I was around 12 or 13 and living with my mother and her family. My dad was away in another country, working. The house that my mother and I were staying in was the house that my dad had built for us. Story 1. I was sleeping in my parents' room. My mom doesn't like sleeping in there without my dad, so she'll sleep on the living room floor instead. I liked how nice and big my parents' room was, so I took advantage of it and I slept in there. It was probably around 2 a.m. when I woke up and I really needed to use the restroom. Directly above the toilet is a tiny wall fan. It's supposed to drag any humidity or stench outside. It kind of looks like those industrial fans, but a lot smaller and without the netting. So it's pretty much an open hole in the wall with fan blades. Directly behind the wall is a dense wooded area. There is a house located within this wooded area, but they are much farther down from this side of the house. Anyway, I'm in there minding my own business until I start hearing music? Chanting? I don't really know what it was, but it sounded old, like it was recorded on a vinyl record. You could hear the little bits of static and fuzz. It sounded like three old men singing or chanting in Thai, but I couldn't understand it at all. It was like ancient Thai. They were definitely using words that I had never heard, and this carried on for a minute or two. I just sat there, more confused than scared. Staring up at the fan, I listened to whatever this was. It was directly behind me, behind this wall. I kept debating on whether or not I should get up and get my phone to record what I was hearing, but I was worried that the singing or chanting would stop or be over by the time I ran back in. It stopped, and I never heard anything like it again. Story 2 happened about a week or so after the first. Instead of sleeping in my parents' room this time, I decided to sleep in the living room with my mom on the couch. She was on the floor. I was honestly a little creeped out from what had happened last time, so I decided to stay close to her. Now, this is by far one of the most, if not the most, horrifying experience I have ever had to go through in regards to the paranormal. It was, again, around 2 a.m. We have 3 windows in the living room that we'd covered up with aluminum foil because we hadn't quite bought curtains yet, and there were 2 large doors on both sides of the room, the front and the back. The back door was just a double door with tiny glass windows, and the front door was a giant glass sliding door. There are no lights on outside, so it's pitch black. You can't see anything out there. The only light source we had in the living room was a faint glow of a few indicator lights on some of the electronics we had in there. Now, I woke up feeling anxious. I don't know why, but I was extremely on edge and creeped out, and I wanted nothing more than to just ignore it and go back to sleep. So I'm laying there, trying my hardest, when all of a sudden, I start hearing this indescribable sound coming from the outside of the house, specifically behind the window that's closest to the giant glass sliding door that I can see nothing through. Immediately, my heart is racing and I begin to sweat. My anxiety is through the roof, and I'm the only one hearing this. Even the dogs aren't reacting. They were still asleep. I kept trying to justify whatever that ungodly sound was. It definitely wasn't human, and I don't think it was an animal either. I don't even think animals can make that noise. It was like a gurgling, groaning version to a clicking sound that Juan makes. It was absolutely horrifying, and it carried on for what felt like an eternity. Again, I kept debating on getting my phone to record it, but I was honestly more terrified than confused this time. I was too afraid to move. But shockingly, I considered getting up to actually go investigate the sound outside. I'm really glad I didn't though, because I don't think I want to know what made that sound, and I have no idea what I would have confronted out there. The next 2 stories are a little more recent and actually happened a few years ago. Both involve dreams and sleep paralysis, and both take place in a country called Bahrain, where again my mother and I are living, but this time in a small apartment. My dad is once again working in another country. I don't remember what time it was when I woke up, but I know it was dark out, and I originally just wanted to take a nap on my bed. So the dream consisted of me in what I believe was a nice, quaint apartment. I was apparently roommates with these two people that I'd never seen before in my life, a guy and a girl. Now the guy and I got along fine. We were just having a nice conversation until the girl burst into the room like she'd been out all day, and she was fuming. She was angry about something and was raging and yelling, saying that it was too bright and to close all the shutters and blinds. This guy and I look at each other with the mutual expressions of, oh dear, this can't be good. He goes after her and follows her around, trying to calm her down as she's making her way through each window, closing all the blinds and shutters while yelling that it's still too bright. As she's doing this, it's getting progressively darker and darker and harder to see. Her yelling is getting louder and more static. At some point, it's so dark I tried to whip my phone out and turn the flashlight on, but it wouldn't turn on. I kept tapping and tapping, all the while her screaming growing louder and fuzzier. And it was just getting to be so dark when suddenly my eyes spring open. I'm now in my bed, in full sleep paralysis. This was my first time ever experiencing it, and I was glad that I had fallen asleep with the lights on. The screaming that I had just heard from my dream followed me into my waking life, but it was just loud static ringing in my ears. I'm trying to move my body, half scared and half angry. I've got limited vision since I'm unable to turn my head or anything, but I look toward my door, and that's when I see it, slowly gliding across my floor toward my slightly open door, is a black shadow figure. I eventually get out of paralysis and I choose to sleep in the living room. I definitely wasn't staying in my room after that. My last story happened about a month after that first experience. I believe this was the first or second time that I had slept in my room since my first sleep paralysis event happened. I slept with my lights on. In the dream, I was in this big room. It was beautiful, like I must have been in a palace or something. The walls were so beautifully detailed, and the bed was massive, with all these drapes and things like that. It was breathtaking, just dark. There was a single candle lighting up the entire room, so the room was not at all well lit. But it was okay. I was okay. I wasn't feeling scared or worried or anything. In fact, I was pretty relaxed. I looked around the room to see that these two double doors were wide open. They led to nothing, and by that I mean it was just pitch black beyond these doors. I couldn't see a thing. Too dark. So I'm standing in this room, just chilling, I guess, until I hear, or feel, a notification from my phone. I pull it out and I see that it's a text from one of my friends. It reads, "So why don't you believe in God, D?" I texted him back with a brief summary as to why I felt the way I did, and then I decided to reach for the light switch. Before I could even touch it, I immediately felt a hard rush of dread wash over me, as if something was terribly, terribly wrong. My mind was panicking and screaming at me, "Wake up! Wake up!" My eyes shot open. I was awake and stuck in paralysis. I already knew where to look, except this time it was different. My eyes were extremely heavy. All they wanted to do was shut, so I could fall back asleep, but I was so scared. I was so terrified that I forced myself to stay awake to gaze at the corner of my room, and that's when I saw it again. The black, shadowy figure slowly gliding its way toward my door. After it had left, my eyes were no longer heavy. I no longer had the desire to sleep. I was wide awake and terrified. I don't remember if I managed to fall back asleep or not, or even leave the room. Around 2 years ago, my cousin from Idaho came down for a visit. I was just out of school, so we had lots of time together to catch up. Most of the time, it was your usual stay up all night being stupid, sneak off and get some food at 4 a.m. type of thing. I've always been into the paranormal and had just introduced him to it. He wanted to go have fun and do stuff like urban exploration. Naturally, we set out to look for a place to go. We found the Byron Hot Springs Hotel. This place was popping in the late 1800s and the early 1900s, with guests such as Charlie Chaplin, Fatty Arbuckle, and Joe DiMaggio. Exactly 2 fires in its existence as a hotel, the third time they thought they'd go big or go home. So they finally made it out of brick. By the 40s, it was called Camp Tracy. The Army had shut it down and used it as a base of operations during World War II, interrogating any enemies in the now empty abandoned hotel. And there it sits, rotting away ever since. No one has done anything else to the place, and it shows. We decided we would go around 2 a.m. We wanted to make sure that nobody would be awake to try and scare us off or try to shoot us because of the no trespassing signs. We all got prepped up and bought headlamps and gloves. My uncle had joined us for the ride and decided to come with us. We ran into a few younger Middle Eastern kids who also wanted to go in. Naturally, we teamed up and headed inside. But these kids were not our typical crowd. They were the normal YouTube type of personality. We come up to a bend in the 1.5 mile walk to the hotel from the road. My uncle pulls out his military-grade flashlight to see if anybody is ahead, and we see glowing eyes. They weren't just one color either. If it glows back in a white or green color, it's an animal. But this varied colors pretty much every second. We see it blink, and we all stopped, frozen in our tracks. This thing was a good 200 to 300 yards away, and that's when it turned its head. The eyes disappeared. We turned the flashlight off and got into the brush on the side of the dirt road. We waited a good 5 minutes and then went back to the spot. We turned the flashlight on and it was already staring back at us. But this time, it stood up, and that's when it seemed unreal. From where we were standing, it had to have been a good 9 feet tall. We got pretty spooked, so we decided to make a beeline back to the cars. The other kids decided that this wasn't the life for them, so they left. We went back to see what it was. We got back to the area that we'd seen it. No footprints, no tracks, nothing, so we decided to keep going. We passed a few palm trees that had pentagrams and telling us to turn back. The usual childish stuff that you see anywhere that isn't inhabited every day. We walked up to the hotel, and it was massive. 4 stories tall with no windows anywhere, just wind whistling through the empty halls. It was a surreal sight to behold. We go around to the side and to the lower level. We figured it would be safer for the time being before we can be sure we're alone. There was an empty elevator shaft that drew all of our attention. We went over and looked at it, and before we knew it, there was dirt dropping on our heads, like somebody had swept it up from the ground on purpose. When that happened, we all got startled. We anticipated someone dropping down the elevator shaft, but that was nothing close to what happened. We heard the sound of running footsteps above us, and with us, in the same room. Whatever it was, they were surrounding us. It was claustrophobic. It felt like the walls were just closing in on you. It all stopped, and we calmed down. It was quiet for a few minutes, until we decided to keep going. We were about to head upstairs and check the sights out. Whoever, or whatever it was, didn't like that one bit. We heard the sound of somebody running through the trash of empty beer cans and glass on the ground, straight for us. We decided that that was enough, and that we had to go. As we left, we saw a drawing on the floor. We realized that there was a pentagram on the floor by the elevator shaft, right where we had backed up into when we heard the running footsteps the first time. We didn't think twice about leaving. We darted out of there as fast as we could. It felt like another 3 miles before we made it to the car. As we got into the car, it felt as if we were getting clouded over with this darkness and sorrow. That claustrophobic feeling had come back. As we left, the feeling left. 2 years later, I'm planning on going back with the original gang together and ready. So, this story takes place around the time of the housing crisis back in 2008 or so. I was in high school at the time. A buddy that I'll call Eric and myself would do some urban exploring by sneaking into empty, abandoned, and foreclosed homes. Of course, we do these explorations in the dead of night to avoid any trouble with the law. I can't give away the location because people now live there, and I have no scientific, rational explanation for what happened. But I know what I saw and heard, so I'd like to share it. We set out at around 12 a.m., just like we would any night. About an hour or so in, we find a house that I often saw on my walks to school. As we walk up to the house, we scan for anyone and then make our way down the large driveway that leads into the backyard of the house. The first thing I noticed is how tall the grass was, like it hadn't been mowed in quite some time. Months, I'd say. Then I notice a smaller house, farther near the back of the property. We told ourselves we'd check that house out once we'd explored the bigger one. We enter the bigger house from the door that leads into the garage, and from the garage we stepped into the kitchen. Believe it or not, the doors were unlocked. When we entered the kitchen, we saw the house was almost pitch black. We can only see a few feet ahead thanks to the streetlights, so I used my only light source at the time, a cheap flip phone with the screen brightness to max. We start our exploration down the hallway and check out each room, 5 in total, counting the 2 living rooms. Eric is close behind me as we make our way through each room and eventually back to the kitchen. Once in the kitchen, we chat about how nice the house is and its size given the area. It was much bigger than the surrounding houses. As we're talking, I notice a metal decoration hanging above the kitchen doorway. It almost looked like some sort of decorative shield. I pull it from its spot and inspect it closely. Once done, I can't figure out how to put it back, so I set it between my feet on the tile floor. I take a look at my friend and take a step into the kitchen. Then, we both hear what sounds like something sliding along the floor and a bang at the end of the hall. Eric and I both freeze and stare at one another through the streetlight shining through the kitchen windows. Eric whispers to me, "Is there someone here with us? Did someone follow us in?" I honestly didn't know, but after a minute or two, we decide to walk down the hall and see what the noise was. As my phone light creeps the end of the wall, we see the shield that I had just pulled down. We were both relieved, and I thought, well, maybe I kicked it when I stepped and didn't notice. I picked it up this time, and I could finally figure out how it needed to be attached to its original position. Once again, I look at Eric and take a step toward him, and I hear a few clangs on the floor, and that familiar sliding sound across the floor, and the bang against the wall. Now we're really scared and frozen, not moving for what seemed like forever. Then, an even louder bang is heard at the other end of the house, and we both jump up and stare into the dark hallway. Then again, bang, and then quiet. and then 3 rapid bangs. Someone was thrashing around in the very last room in the house, and we didn't know what to do. Determined not to let this person scare us, we run toward that last room and confront this jerk. Except that when we get there, nothing. No one. The room was completely empty. But how? Who? We were sure it was coming from this room. There's no way whoever it was slipped by us. The room had a sliding glass door leading into the backyard, but it was locked from the inside. Then, before we could gather our thoughts and ask each other what was happening, bang, 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 this time from the kitchen. It scared me out of my mind, and we both agreed that it was time to leave. We make our way through the back door in the room and finally to the street, all while checking over our shoulders to ensure that nobody was going to come running out of the house after us. No one came, and the neighborhood was quiet. Eric and I started our walk home, talking about the house, when Eric notices that his pocket knife is missing. He then turns his pockets inside out to show me that he's not joking. We stop, and he keeps telling me we have to go back for it, since it's his favorite one. Frustrated, I asked him, "How did you lose it if it's your favorite?" He assures me that he never removed it from his pocket, and has no idea how it could have been removed. I agree to go with him and find it. We make it halfway up the street, when Eric tells me his back feels like it's on fire. I can see it's really bothering him because of the expression of pain on his face. He asks me to lift his shirt and look at what could be causing this sensation. I lift his shirt and quickly notice 3 very large scratches starting from his right shoulder blade, going all the way down to his left hip, and then from his left hip across to his right hip. I tell him this, and he immediately says the house is haunted, but he still wants to get his knife. I'm scared, but I'm not going to let him go in alone. So we make our way back into the house, and immediately we hear that banging noise. But we made a pact with each other that we would not run, no matter what happened. We begin our search for the knife, looking high and low, all while hearing banging, and now things are being thrown across the room. Of course, I'm scared out of my mind, and I want to leave, but we haven't found the knife yet. We do one pass through the entire house and end up in the kitchen. In the kitchen, there is an entrance to the second living room that you can see from the backyard. In that room, there is one piece of furniture, a hutch. Now, we had already checked this room since it's near our point of entrance and found nothing. But we decide one more pass through wouldn't hurt. I make my way into the dark room and let my light lead me to the hutch. And there it is. On the hutch, we find the knife. But for sure, we check this room and the hutch. He didn't hesitate for a moment. He grabbed the knife and we hightailed it out through the garage and back onto the street. We make our way to our homes, but the entire week we would talk about this house and what was going on there. We brushed it off and didn't believe it. I mean, there had to be some explanation, right? So we go back. But we bring 3 friends with us because they all wanted to see this haunted house that Eric and I wouldn't shut up about. While walking through the backyard, I can't explain it, but for some reason I wanted to get a closer look at the back house. I start making my way toward the house, but I start to feel scared. A feeling of dread came out of nowhere. I turn away from the house and start my way back to the group, but out of the corner of my eye, I see something leap from the bushes. Some dark figure leaped from that bush and into the tall grass, but when I gave it my full attention, it was gone. I stared at the bushes for a moment, a little confused, but I brushed it off. I did mention it to the group when I caught up with them, but it was quickly dismissed. We enter through the garage door, and this time we noticed a white bookshelf full of light bulbs in the garage. The bookshelf was probably about 5 feet high and 3 feet wide, and completely filled with packaged light bulbs. We study it for a moment and make our way into the kitchen, with Eric leading and me in the back. I enter last and shut the kitchen and garage door behind me. As soon as I release the doorknob, we hear what sounded like someone in the garage breaking all the light bulbs on the bookshelf. Stunned, I remember my heart beating a mile a minute, waiting for whatever the heck it was to start trying to fight its way into the kitchen. But nothing came, and Eric finally said, "Well, I guess we're not going back now." We make our way to the very last room in the house, the same room that Eric and I had exited through the last time we were there. Whatever it was did not disappoint. Random objects were being thrown against the wall in front of us. We could hear loud banging all throughout the dark house, like there were people fighting in there. One of the friends decided he'd had enough and opened the glass door to the backyard, and four of us start making our way through the backyard. I turn around and wait for Eric. He was not moving, caught in a daze, standing in front of an unhinged door that was propped against the wall for support. Eric was staring down the hallway, as if waiting for something. I had to call his name 3 times before he realized we were leaving. He stepped forward, and before my eyes, it looked as though someone tried to throw the unhinged door on top of him. Eric jumped out of the way and started toward me, scared out of his wits. The other 3 were already to the street almost, so we just tried to keep up the pace and catch up. As soon as we reached the street, one of the friends kept telling us how messed up that house was. You could see the look of terror on his face as he expressed his feelings about the place. He then mentions a burning feeling going up his calf, and sure enough, he's got those scratches, starting from his ankle and stopping midway through his calf. Just before we split up to go home, the 3 of them swear that place off. And that was the last time that those 3 friends spoke to us. We ended up going to the house a few times after that, but nothing absolutely memorable happened. We heard the knocks and the bangs and whatnot. It wasn't until we took Eric's older brother, we'll call him Derek, that things got really crazy. By this time, we've visited the house a few times and had become pretty much numb to the banging and thrown objects. We found it more amusing than anything else. Like, check this place out, it's haunted. But this time it got more aggressive. After touring the house and seeing Derek freak out, we decided to have a chat in the kitchen. I was standing in front of the windowing, leaning against the windowsill. Eric was to my right, leaning against the wall, and Derek was standing across from me in front of the doorway that leads to the second living room I mentioned earlier. We talk about how scary the house is and all that. Derek turned around to check the living room behind him. I mentioned to him that that was the hutch we found Eric's knife on after running around the whole house searching for it. As he turns to face me, Derek fell into the room, almost like something had pushed him or dragged him from behind. I remember looking at his face and seeing a look of terror as he tried to grab onto the doorway for dear life, but the push or pull was too strong. He fell on his ass into the room, but immediately jumped up and ran over to me. He grabbed me by my shirt and started screaming at me. "Yo, what's your problem? Why did you push me? Why the hell did you push me?" I just kept telling him that I didn't push him. Eric jumped between us and confirmed what I was saying. "He didn't push you, dude, you fell in." Derek explains that someone, or something, had pushed him in, but it wasn't us. After that, he obviously wanted to leave, so we all agreed. But before we left, Eric and I both told Derek to check his pockets, just to make sure nothing was missing. Of course, his pocket knife is missing. But it's okay. We found the last one, we'll find this one, right? We searched the whole house, and nothing, as expected. Now it's time to check the hutch. First pass, nothing. Second pass, nothing. Third, nothing. We were like, okay, now this knife is really gone. Derek wants one more pass through the house, and we agree. We make it to the far room with no luck. We started making our way back to the kitchen with me leading. As I'm coming up to the kitchen, my cell phone light starts to reflect off something shining in front of the door that leads to the front yard. It was the knife, jammed deep into the door. There was no way that that knife could have been jammed into the door without any of us hearing it. Derek takes his knife and we get out of there. I never went back after that. Out of all the bullshit that went down in that house, that was the not welcome sign that I took seriously. And that's it. That's everything I can remember. Eric moved not long after that, and I moved away at the end of 2009. I haven't seen the house since, except when I tell the story to friends, I pull up the house on Google Images. I visit Eric from time to time, and we always talk about what happened there. I don't think it's likely we'll ever forget it.